Hey guys, Bob here, aka Mr. Reef Safe, and today I'm answering your questions. Before I get started, I want to say that most of the questions I don't know what are going to be asked of me. You see, the person that typed them up for me put them in a specific order. I only know the first two because those were kind of chronologically where I began. So I asked for those two to be up front. Let's get started with the first question. Question number one, how long have I been in the hobby? Well, that's a good question. This is a little ambiguous for me because I was in the Scouts. I was about 7, 8, 9 years old when I started having an aquarium at home because our Scoutmaster had an aquarium and I was very enamored with it. He had a pacu in it and I thought that was the coolest thing I'd ever seen, a 55-gallon tank. I'd never seen a tank so big in my life. And of course, I begged my parents and we got a little 5-gallon tank and we put guppies in it and I had the start of my hobby. That of course was freshwater. It wasn't until I was in college that I started working at a little fish store in Clark Summit, Pennsylvania called John's Fish Pond. And one of my coworkers, a guy by the name of Peter, had a saltwater tank that he was selling with a lionfish in it. It was a 55-gallon tank. He asked me if I would be interested in it, and I said, sure, why not? So that's what got me started on the saltwater side of the hobby. Question two kind of follows in from question one. When was my first reef tank? My first saltwater aquarium was in 1993, again with the lionfish. I quickly added a Picasso trigger and a snowflake eel to that, and I had varying degrees of success over the next few years. I believe my first snowflake eel was eaten by the lionfish, which died shortly thereafter. I didn't know what I was doing. I got 5-gallon box mixes of Instant Ocean. They were little boxes. They cost about, I don't know, $5 to $10 at the time. And I'd mix up 5 gallons from tap water. And of course, I was a freshwater guy, so I did things like, use dechlorinator in it. And that's what I thought you had to do. So I had a lot of failures at the very beginning. I remember getting a pencil urchin and putting in the tank, and of course my trigger went nuts for it and ate it and killed it within the first few minutes. But that was not my first reef tank. My first foray into reefing would have been in the mid-90s. It was the same 55-gallon tank. Of course, I had graduated on to damsels at that point because, hey, they were pretty much bulletproof and I could have them in there. And of course, if I kept enough in there, that would keep the aggression down. And I think I had about 10 damsels in this 55-gallon tank. And I met a guy at a local fish store when I was in New York at the time. And I met a guy at a local fish store, and he was telling me he had these little things growing in his tank, that little flower type things growing on the crushed coral of his tank. And he asked me if I would be interested in having one for my tank. And I, sure, why not? It's something other than just bone white crushed coral with some green algae growing on it and a few bone white coral skeletons. So I decided, yeah, I would like to have one of these flowers. And I met up with the guy and he sold me this little flower for my saltwater aquarium. Didn't know anything about it. He said, just float the bag for a little bit and put it in. So that's what I did. And it wasn't until years later I found out that that was Aptasia that I had added to the tank. And I have to say, over the next few years, I sold quite a few frags of Aptasia for, I think, $3 to $5 in the mid-90s. But that was still not my first reef tank. My first reef tank was when I moved to Texas. I had bought a house, and this was 2001, when I had a 29-gallon saltwater tank. Again, I had damsels in it, and I didn't even know what live rock was at the time. I had gotten, again, still being very, very new into the saltwater thing and just following basic freshwater principles. I had gotten the lava rock, the white kind of colorish lava rock. I know that's not what it's called. I can't think of what it is at the moment. And I had that throughout the tank. And I was at a Petco and they had what they called a cult coral. And I went, why not? It's something different. I'll put that in the tank. And that was really the beginning of my reef tank. I really started to enjoy that. I had that one coral in there, it was thriving. It just had the whisper filter on the back. It had an undergravel filter and crushed coral and just some dead rock in there. And it was looking good to me at that point in time. And that's when I decided I wanted to go bigger. And that's a story for another day, but it was 2004 that I got a 110-gallon tank. That is where I really began my reefing story. Okay, so the next question is, where did I get my aquascape from in my current tank? I'll step to the side here. When I got it, it was pretty bone white. I got it from Top Shelf Aquatics in Orlando. It was custom built for me, and they did an amazing job on it. I just love this. At first I thought, this is kind of weird looking, you know, I like the design of it, but it's just flat rock on top of flat rock on top of flat rock, you know, and I wasn't sure that this is what I wanted, but I spoke with Kevin, one of the owners of TSA, and he suggested putting pieces of rock, instead of using frag plugs, which I never used in my tank, I always glued it straight to the rocks in my tank. He said get some rock bits and little pieces of rock, glue it to that, and then glue that to the aquascape. And you know, which I've done that before in the past with the you know, the basically pile of boulders that I had in my tank, rearranged in all different ways to try to get a pattern. But it didn't occur to me to do this until he mentioned that. So I started doing that, and all of a sudden it started losing that flat shape to where it started looking more like maybe more of a natural thing. I know it's not natural because it's man-made and it's, you know, got a structure to it, but that's where I got this rock, and I really like it. And I highly suggest, if you are interested, contact the fine folks at Top Shelf Aquatics. They are not sponsoring this, but I like this rock so much, I'll give them a shout out. All right, the next question is, what fish do you suggest for beginners? Okay, so that's kind of a loaded question, because are you going with a reef tank? Are you going with a fowler tank that's fish only with live rock? Are you doing a soft coral, a hard coral? But I'm going to assume at this point you're probably going to do softies and maybe LPS. And I would say, you know, the quintessential beginners are the clownfish, things of that nature, the smaller gobies, things that are a little easier to care for. I know, I'm trying to think what else. Firefish are good beginner fish. Boy, I can't even think off the top of my head what I would suggest without more specifically what type of tank it is. It really depends on that. But I would say clownfish, firefish, and gobies would be the top of my head go-to. Next question. Oh, this is gonna be a good one. What, if any, devastating mistakes have you made in the hobby? Boy, devastating mistakes. I've never had a full tank crash, so I can't say that. In this tank here, I'll give an example. So recently I decided that I was going to redo my dosing lines. I didn't like the way they were, and so I started to redo them, and I found out that I really could not do it the way I wanted to unless I ordered some more parts. So I decided just to put it back the way it was, and I have 4 dosing lines. I got my alkalinity, my calcium, my minor trace elements, and then I dose, and my 4th one is a mix of flatworm stop and coral booster from KZ products. And I just mix them together. I found out from KZ that is perfectly fine, mixing those 2 together. And so that is my 4th one. Well, the alkalinity, I dose about 75 milliliters a day, calcium about 120, and my part C, the minor trace, about 200 milliliters a day. And the KZ, I dose about 12 milliliters a day. Well, when I was putting the hoses back, I made a mistake and crossed the KZ and the minor trace element hoses. So I very quickly dosed over the course of 3 days, 600 milliliters of KZ product. And the water was getting cloudy, I was getting algae bloom, or a bacterial bloom, and I could not figure out why until my Apex told me that my KZ products were running low, or excuse me, my minor trace elements were running low, and I looked and they were not running low, and I couldn't figure out why. I thought something had happened. Well, it was me. It happened. I had crossed the hoses. I saw right next to it that container with the KZ products was near empty, and it struck me exactly what I did. So I quickly switched the hoses back. I stopped dosing the KZ for the next several weeks, and I did heavy water changes over the next week. I did 20% water changes every day for a week, and thankfully all I did was lose a couple digitata. I had a little bit of recession on some corals, but they're starting to come back. It's been about 2-3 weeks now. It started to look better. The funny thing is, some of the corals that were slow growers, some of the LPS, started to really boost during that time, probably due to the water changes and making sure that it wasn't so heavy. It was the SPS that I was having trouble with, and that's part of the reason that I have a lot of this algae as well, because of my devastating failure. I can't think of anything else. I've had a magnet break, a casing of a magnet break in my tank, and that caused an issue with copper and iron, and I had another issue with high aluminum, which could have been attributed to the biological media plate that I was using at the time, or the salt that I was using at the time. I've taken care of both those things. I'm not using either one of those products anymore, and I have not had trouble. And I ICP test now every other month because I want to make sure I know what's going on in my tank. I think I have time for one more question, and the question is, what corals can you not keep? I'm assuming that question is, what corals can I personally not keep? I don't think I've ever had any specific corals I couldn't keep. I've lost some corals over time, but it's not like I would try multiple times on the same coral and it would die. That's another good question. I think I'll answer it like this. What corals will I not keep? I won't keep softies. I'm not really interested in softies. I think they're beautiful and I love them in other people's tanks, but I think they're a lot of work. Whereas LPS and SPS, a lot less work maintenance-wise. At least that's my experience. So when I had softies, I was constantly having to trim back, and I don't know, I just didn't find it as fun. But if you like softies, great. I would love to see pictures of that too, because I do think they're beautiful in somebody else's tank. I don't really keep zoanthids. I have one rock here in the center with some what are locally called Armor of God zoanthids, and I like those. I've always liked those, so I decided to keep those in the tank, but they are isolated to a single rock. And I don't do mushrooms. Again, I think they're really good looking. I'm just not interested in them because they grow very fast, and let's face it, I'm a stickhead. So I like my hard SPS corals, and my wife really likes the LPS, so that's why I have so much LPS in here. I mean, I think they look good. It's just I prefer the colorful sticks. I do kind of like the gonopores though. I've kind of gotten into those. Again, I can't think of any corals that I have not been able to successfully keep if I put the work to it, but I'm sure there are, and if I ever come up against that, I will let you know. I can revisit this question in the future. Well guys, thanks for watching, and I want to tell you that you can go on Instagram and message me. It's Mr. Reef Safe on Instagram, and you can message me your questions, and maybe you'll make it into the next question and answer video. And I know that there are quite a few more questions because I can see the stack of cards there, and hopefully that's something that I'll get to do another video on soon. And again, keep the questions coming in, and I will keep answering them. It'll be kind of a regular thing, I think. I enjoyed sharing a little bit trip down memory lane for me, especially remembering about selling frags of Aptasia. Well guys, thanks for watching. I'm Bob, aka Mr. Reef Safe. Please like and subscribe and comment below.